Lonesome Lands Podcast, Lonesome Report, June
Fourth.
4th, 2025. We recorded the end of this Lonesome History segment on June 3rd, so we might look a little different at the end for whatever reason. Don't worry about it. But if you want to support what we're doing, go to lonesomelands.com, click on subscribe or click on store, and you can see different options there how to support us. If you want to advertise, email jim@lonesomelands.com. Here we go. Big week. This is going to be, we got a lot of stuff. I finally feel a little bit prepared. The Angus Association. We talked about this about 6 weeks ago, but what everybody seems to be talking about, the Angus Association has accepted a grant. They applied for and accepted a grant for $4.85 million from the Bezos Earth Fund to study methane production in cattle, I guess. And this came out in April. They announced it in April. And we talked about it on here.
Yep.
Shad brought it up, and we kind of went over it. It's just kind of like a big surprise. It's not that big of a surprise to us because I
No.
started Lonesome Lands 2017, almost 2008. I think it was October. But so, close to 8 years now, we've been looking at this stuff, and it's the same old thing for way more than 8 years. And I'm going to get into that whole timeline of how we got here. But to get into but so, as I've been looking over this stuff, 8 years, when you hear 4.85 million, I mean, Farm Journal got $40 million to collect and measure, monitor, report, verify greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture last year. So when you hear 4.85, it's like, oh yeah, big surprise. When you hear Angus Association and you know all the stuff that they're into, it's like, oh yeah, big surprise. Um, but their members took exception to it. And last week, I texted Shad. I said I always have trouble with the headlines on here, and so I text Shad and I said the headlines for last week: does the cattle industry or has the cattle industry lost its balls or something like that? And Shad's response was no. And the reason I texted him, I was like, is this too crude to put this as a headline on YouTube? Did you think it was too crude?
Yeah. And I don't think it's too crude because we have lost our testicular fortitude, but I
Right.
thought we needed a little classier punch than have the pansies lost their balls, right?
Right. And so I guess I scrapped that headline and I came out with the courage of those who came before us, because a lot of what we talked about, we got into Charlie Goodnight, which we talk about more on here. And just the people who came before us wouldn't stand for this kind of stuff.
No.
And then here we are this week, the Angus Association, members of the Angus Association, um, are showing that they got some balls, and they put together this petition. They thought it was the best way to get eyeballs on this and get the attention of the leadership of the Angus Association, was they put together a petition for the Angus Association to return that money, the Bezos Earth Fund money. They want them to send that money back, and how that'll all work, it doesn't seem like anybody knows, or if it'll ever happen, or what'll happen if they don't. But that's kind of the big news of the week.
Yeah, what
And
it is it's just a partnership between the Bezos Earth Fund and the American Angus Association. There are other partners in this $27.5 million deal, $27.5 million deal, where the Angus Association got 85 million of that, for methane research and the effects of methane of this research on cattle efficiency. That's what it amounts to. And it really is just a partnership, of a trade organization with, it looks a lot like a public private partnership, but it's a partnership with those who are actually against the beef industry. They are not our friends, right?
cattle industry.
Yeah.
I'll say that because the
Yeah.
beef industry is all in on this crap.
Yeah. The beef industry's in, but we've seen, the cattle industry starting to partner up and have for a long time. I mean, started a long time ago, but there was something about this partnership with, Bezos Earth Fund and American Angus Association that absolutely struck their members wrong. And there was a catalyst in there. I don't know what the catalyst was, Jim.
Well, I
We
think it's, I mean, you and I both, we talked to Brian Palmer, who's the name on the
yeah, he started the petition.
who's the name on the petition, but it was a group of members. Bucky Derflinger I talked to, who's
Yeah.
advertised on our podcast, and
Yep.
he's a friend of the program, and he's all fired up about it. Chris Earl has reposted and really been pushing it on Facebook with and he's an Angus guy. The Herbster Angus, which I was
Yeah,
surprised,
I was surprised.
really came out against it too.
Mhm.
So there's a number of members in there that are really pushing the petition and really pushing back
Yeah.
on this deal. And I think what it gets down to, the reason those guys are members of that association is because they keep and are in charge of like the EPDs and the genetic information where they sell their bulls and how they buy their bulls and what EPDs expected progeny differences, right? And so those are just characteristics of what the bull is expected to have as far as birth weights, weaning weights, kind of the
It's
efficiency.
data. It's all
Yeah.
about data.
And and the Angus Association is who keeps those records, I believe. And this money is being taken in this whole study by the Bezos Earth Fund and the Global Methane Hub
Yep.
and all of these climate nuts. The end goal, if you read the Bezos Earth Fund, is they want to create an EPD for methane. They think they can reduce methane production in cattle by 30% if they start breeding cattle that create less methane. Which
Or feeding an additive.
right.
That's part
Yeah.
of the study as
Well,
well.
and if you go into Bezos, like what's not talked about on this deal, on their thing, but if you go into the Earth Fund, Bezos, let me read what they say about him. Jeff Bezos' Earth Fund is funding research into a cattle vaccine aimed at reducing methane emissions, significant contributor to global warming.
At thirty
This
dollars a head.
This cow fart vaccine seeks to reduce methane production in cows by targeting methane producing bacteria in their stomachs. And so, what the Angus Association, University of Nebraska was also a big, they got a bunch of money on this same deal. And what, the concern is that you've been beaten for years, I've been beaten for years, is cattle are not bad for the environment. I mean, end of story.
They're
So when
good
you
for the
go into
environment.
these studies and you take this money and you agree to these studies, you are saying, well, by reducing methane, you're saying that cattle methane is bad for the environment. It's not. I mean, that's where this suggestion should have started and ended with the cattle industry. Cattle are part of the environment. I'll go back to Keely Cavello's dad, Rich, I think, Richard Brazil. Dr. Brazil, he's a veterinarian, and he had the best quote I've ever heard, which is saying cattle are bad for the environment is like saying fish are bad for the ocean.
Yeah.
Right? There's methane producing wildlife, which is just like what cattle are, that have been there since the beginning of time. And to say that man-made climate change, the cattle are a result of that is just it's asinine and it's BS and it comes from people who want to destroy our industry.
Sure.
So,
That's what it's about, is about getting people off the land. It's ultimately a land issue. We weren't talking about this when there were 60 million buffalo running across the plains of the Americas. And it is all just a fruit of what they've been preaching to us for a long time. And that is to sit at the table with your
right.
enemy.
And so to get into, I thought, well, the way to describe this the best way, like we talked about how we talked about this, and we didn't hammer on it like we probably should have because to us, we've seen it so many times. But now I think people are starting to wake up and they're
Yes.
growing balls and they're getting
Yes.
this together, and it's so awesome to see. But we need to keep pushing on it, and just to give people an idea of how we got here. I've talked about that a lot. Like, how did we get here? I think that's always important to look at. Um, and I put down kind of a timeline of how we ended up getting here. And in 2006 is where, I mean, that's definitely not where, the whole climate change. I had I'll link to a speech I did last year where I talked to how the cattle industry has agreed to the lie of climate change and how cattle are destroying the planet. In taking these investments and dealing in these programs is just agreeing to the lie that,
Yes.
that cattle are destroying the environment. And so you go back to that beginning of that, which is 2006, which is the United Nations put out a report, which has been debunked and shown to be BS every which way. Everyone goes back to this report. When it's looked at, how it was researched, the people doing the research, it's all BS. It was called Livestock's Long Shadow, but that's how they got their toe in the door. And
Right.
and when that came in, people saw that. UN, the United Nations came out with that to destroy the beef industry and the agriculture industry, probably specifically in America. Um, and they wanted to get their toe in the door. They put this out there for people to grab onto. There was a documentary done. What was that called? I can't remember it. I can't remember what it was called now, but there was documentaries based on it. All of these animal rights people who've wanted to destroy the beef industry for their entire lives, and their entire careers, they took this and they ran with it. And then in 2010, those same people put together a roundtable for sustainable beef.
Well,
And
that was when the
Shad,
talk started, was around 2010, and then the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef was actually initiated in 2012. I started hearing about it in 2010, and that's what got me active. But it's officially came online in 2012.
right. And so I just Googled that this morning and I came up with 2010, but maybe that's when they started pushing it. And I know Shad has been pushing against this from in 2010 I was clueless on all of this stuff, and Shad's been fighting this way longer than I have. But um, and I believe NCBA was a founding member.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which is U.S. supposed to be representing U.S. cattle producers, they were a founding member of this roundtable for sustainable beef. And I wanted to get into when you say for sustainable beef, that means that some beef is not sustainable, meaning not environmentally sustainable, which is, to go back to my first thought, is BS. Beef in the U.S., no matter how it's raised, no matter what, if you're put it in a 150,000 head feedlot, or if you're got it out on out in a pasture, one cow on 100 acres, it's sustainable. It's not destroying the environment. That's where the cattle industry needed to stand up and say that. Instead, what they said is we have to have a seat at the table. Um, and I'm going to go through what a seat at the table has gotten the U.S. cattle industry. Because in 2015, I guess one thing, going back to this roundtable for sustainable beef, I remember riding around in pickup with you down there in Texas. We were taking some cows to a sale barn, and I made a video of it. But what didn't make the video is I talked about, because when I started into this, I had those same questions everybody else does. Well, what's wrong with having a seat at the table, right? Like, why can't they just go and be a part of this and represent the U.S. cattle producer? And remember, I'm sure you remember what you said, right?
Why would you sit with the enemy?
Yeah, but you said it's a freedom. You said you're lying, I believe. It's a freedom taker. It's
It's a
not a
freedom
freedom,
taker.
right? And what
Yeah.
I go back to, you have that line of freedom taker and freedom maker, and what that always reminds me of, who are you working for in this
Yeah.
process? And NCBA will say they went down there and they got a seat at the table for the U.S. cattle producer. But if you go through, I mean, that was a long time ago, 2010. What are we at?
Yeah.
15 years ago. But you can now we have 15 years of history to look at of who are you working for when you sit down at that table. And it goes back to people like when you say, well, how can you be against mandatory EID and for mandatory country of origin labeling on beef? And the answer to that is easy. And it's one sometimes people struggle with, and I've struggled with it in the past, but it's who are you working for? when you want to mandate every cattle producer in the U.S. to put a specific ear tag that can hold information and track all those cattle, who are you working for? You're working for the corporate industry, the corporate beef packers, the corporate cattle feeders. You're not working for cattle producers, like ranchers, cow calf guys, independent cattle producers. And so for mandatory country of origin label, who are you working for? If you're fighting against the country of origin label, you're working for those same corporate interests. If you're working for the mandatory country of origin label, you're working for independent cattle producers in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean,
I feel
here's
like
how
I'm
you
just
have
going
to.
off now, but
Here's the question. You're going off, but here's the simplicity of it, Jim. You have to ask yourself, with everything that's being presented on every level, whether it's in your state congressional house, in your federal congressional house, in your life, in your trade association policies, does this policy, is it a freedom maker or is it a freedom taker? Those are the two questions you have to ask yourself. And when people say, okay, well, you can't have MCOOL without mandatory EID, that's stupid, because MCOOL is a mandate by the federal government or the people who ask for it that uplifts freedom of choice, right? That is a freedom maker. So it creates more freedom for the people, the
right.
consumer in this case. Where if you have mandatory EID or all of these policies that the GRSB, USRSB, the United Nations, World Economic Forum, your trade associations that have bought into the lie, these policies are freedom takers. In other words, they collect your private data, on your private property, and they take that from you, and then they use that to punish you through production standards down the road.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Freedom
And
maker or freedom taker.
and to take it back to this methane study, what do you think they're going to do with the results of that methane study?
Exactly. We've
I
already
mean, you
seen what
think
they
that
do with it in the European Union. We
right?
saw it in Ireland. We saw it in the Netherlands. We saw it in Switzerland. We saw it in the UK. I mean, the fruits are already there. Australia. Oh, who's going to be the head
Yeah,
of the money program on this partnership? The
yeah,
University of New England in Australia. They've already all of these countries already have mandatory EID. Right. That's what
yeah.
this is sustainable development at its very core. And it's anti-agriculture, anti-land, anti-property rights, and ultimately anti-human. It's all about the land,
Anti-American. I mean, why are we sending
anti-American all the way.
4.85 million to? I mean, they said the vast majority of the money is going to what's the school called? It's in Australia,
The
University of
University of New England in Australia.
yeah. So that's what confuses me. But Australia is a New England, I guess, how they were founded. But um, yeah, and but then also Angus Association says 3% of all that money is going to they're getting it for administration fees or something like that.
Yeah.
And then they said it can be used for scholars. They didn't say it will be used for. I want to key in on that word. They said in their rebuttal, they said it can be used for scholarships and continuing education. They didn't say it will be. They said it could be. But to go back to this timeline, so 2006, Livestock's Long Shadow is a UN report. 2010, the International Roundtable for Sustainable Beef was created. In 2015, under our Barack Obama, Tom Vilsack, our last, the guy who, well, I won't even get into it. Under that USDA, they recommended limiting your beef intake. They recommended for all
Correct.
Americans. So 5 years after, well, I guess 3 years after, NCBA sits down at this roundtable for sustainable beef to give
Yep.
cattlemen a seat at the table. U.S. Department of Agriculture recommends limiting your beef intake due to climate change. Um, just right, next thing that happens,
That's right.
2015, and in that same year, 2015, the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef was created. Founding member, Angus Association of America. They wanted to have a seat at that table. And to go back, when you say for sustainable beef, what you're saying is that some beef is not sustainable, which just goes back to what I've been talking about. But and another thing is NCBA people who had problems like Shad and other groups who had problems with this roundtable for sustainable beef. And NCBA said, you need a seat at the table. And then they convinced all their affiliates, a lot of their affiliates, state organizations. I know Iowa Cattlemen's is part of U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. A lot of these state affiliates are in on this deal, which is all the same kind of crap, and it's run by the same people. The chairman of the U.S. Roundtable, what was her name, Shad? The ch
Uh, Lobby
Yeah,
with the Nature
Labbe.
Conservancy.
But yeah, she works
Labbe.
for Nature Conservancy.
Yeah.
So the Nature Conservancy, which we've talked about here a lot, if you haven't missed the episodes, they just bought a 28,000, 25,000 acre ranch.
Yeah.
They receive tons of federal money. They buy up ranches. I mean, their goal is to get producers off of the land so that they can control it for their wildlife, and
It's all
climate change.
interwoven. That's
Yeah,
what you're trying to say. It's all
right.
interwoven. And remember, two of the founding members, which if you look at the board of directors of the U.S. and the Global Roundtables for Sustainable Beef, they come from trade associations. These are what they call multi-stakeholder initiatives, and what that is it's top-down governance. And that's exactly what this is with the Methane Hub and the Bezos Earth Fund is top-down governance. And you can't believe some of the members. These are people that you know.
Texas
Texas
cattle
Cattle
feeders.
Feeders
Yeah.
Association, Debbie Lyons Blythe is big into it, and they're Angus people up in Kansas. And it's all about this top down governance, which is totally opposite of what we do, how our government is formed in America. And so that's the connection you need to recognize and realize that this is all coming from the top down, not from the bottom up. And that's where we've gone wrong in the cattle and the beef industry is we have allowed these people that don't have a stake in the game to control us and control policy from the top down. We
Right.
have to stop that. And two of those founding members, don't forget it, the Nature Conservancy and the World Wildlife Fund, they are in everything.
Right. But then we should also give a shout out. Someone else who's been on the front lines and understood this before almost anybody, Andrea Hutchinson.
Oh yeah, she's my mentor.
She's sitting now and she's recovering. She had a bad bout of pneumonia and had a lot of people worried here in the last week or so. She's had surgery. I think she's getting better and recovering.
Yep.
So, I mean,
Andrea Hutchinson is the most knowledgeable person on these issues in the United States, if not in the world, because
yeah.
she has put together the diabolical diagram of the interwoven web of corruption that this is creating to go against everything that America stands for.
And people
Everything.
have listened to her talk and to you talk, and we talk about these diabolical webs, and they're like, "Oh, you people are crazy." Well, here we are, you
Yeah,
know.
here we are.
And I mean, it's almost like an exciting time where people's eyes are being opened
Yeah.
to all of this stuff. Because, like I said, in 2010, if you heard that and you didn't see all this history, you didn't see 15 years of what this has brought, you would probably be like, well, I don't know. But now we're 15 years later, and she understood this. I mean, she was explaining to me how this ESG thing started in the 90s,
Yep.
and and she kind of laid it out for me, and it blew my mind how she was already kind of in. She just started following it and really got into it. But to get back, so U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef starting in 2015. In 2016, another member of the U.S. Roundtable Sustainable Beef, Tyson Foods, which is the U.S.'s biggest beef packer. They've been sitting at the table with these cattlemen, and they decided to invest in Beyond Meat. And in Beyond Meat, I believe it was 2012. It was PETA's Company of the Year. Beyond Meat is plant-based. The plant-based meat company that Bill Gates invested in. I don't know if Bezos invested in. I should have looked that up. But all these people invested in. They went public, and now they had the all-time high, I think, IPO, and now they're just in the gutter and practically broke, scraping the bottom. But so 1 year after U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and everybody sits down at the table with Tyson Foods, and a year later they're investing in a company whose goal is to end the U.S. cattle industry.
That's right.
2017 Cargill, U.S. number 2 beef packer, I'm just focusing on US beef packers for now because JBS is probably the biggest investor in lab meat and alternative protein.
Right.
But they're in Brazil, so I mean it gets almost too complicated. But in 2017, Cargill invests in Memphis Meats, which at the time they're now called Upside Foods. Memphis Meats, Bill Gates also invested them. They're the lab. They were kind of the original lab-based meat company where they say that they're going to grow steaks out of these cells that they keep in a petri dish full of antibiotics and
Right.
chemicals, and that's how you're going to grow your steak. And um, how I heard about it, they were on the cover of a magazine, and it said the end of slaughter. That was their first kind of tagline. They were going to end all animal slaughter for for beef production. And so Cargill invests in them. The next year, 2018, Tyson invests in them also. So now you have both U.S. meat packers invested in lab meat, and then in 2010, Cargill invests in Beyond Meat. So you have both of the biggest U.S. beef packers invested in the two main companies whose main goals were to end beef production in the United States. And so this comes, 2019, if you go to 12, so then you're 7 years after NCBA wanted to sit down at the table and give the cattleman's point of view with these same companies in this same deal. And one thing I think is interesting about that, this Memphis Meats, they wanted to end slaughter. Beyond Meat is PETA's Company of the Year. Colin Woodall just wrote an op-ed, who is the CEO of NCBA, saying that anyone against the beef checkoff is an environmental activist and an animal is siding with the animal rights outfit. I don't know that NCBA has ever commented on Cargill or Tyson's investments in these companies. And
No.
those both of those companies are members in NCBA, and they're not a member like your rancher's a member in NCBA. NCBA has these different tiers of membership where you
Yes.
pay tens of thousands to maybe hundreds of thousands. I should look into it to so you're a specific member, like an allied member, or a gold star member or something like that.
And
And so
perhaps sit
that's
on the
where
board.
yeah. And so that's where Tyson and Cargill are, and they have a lot of control over NCBA, way more than your average rancher or even your average state affiliate or any of these things. They're running it. And that's and so when they come out and they say, somebody like me, I did a speech last year at the RCAF convention against the checkoff. I've probably been more against the checkoff the last few years than about anybody. And so when he says I'm an animal rights activist, but they have no problem partnering up with people who are investing in PETA's Company of the Year. When
No,
something like that happens, they don't say nothing.
that's right.
I think that's
Because they're
important to say
forked
too.
tongued. That's what we talk about
Yeah.
all the time. They're forked tongued.
Yeah. These people are, I mean, that just goes to Colin Woodall. And the worst part about that article he wrote is at the end, it just said Colin Woodall is the CEO of NCBA. It didn't say that Colin Woodall's NCBA is the number one contractor for the beef checkoff,
No,
and they've got his picture in there with his little hat on his head, like he's some cattle rancher working for the NCBA, where he used to be a lobbyist for Cargill. Now he's a lobbyist for NCBA. But to go through those 5 years between 2015, where the roundtable was started, and then through all of these investments in this fake meat stuff, that is where ESG comes in. And I mentioned that about Andrea. She understood this before anybody. But environmental, sustainable governance.
it's
Um,
environmental social governance.
yeah, yeah, social governance. Yeah, you're right.
It's the triple bottom line of sustainable development. That's what
Right.
it is.
Yeah. When you hear sustainable development, that is what this is. And that is where all of those investments come from is this ESG push and to control greenhouse gas emissions and really just control every industry, get control of every industry. Alex Newman said it best. When you try to control carbon, every aspect of your life creates carbon, including living and dying. When you die, you create carbon. I mean, every single thing you do creates carbon. So if you have, back when I started this deal, I heard they told me, well, Al Gore just wants to control your life. That's why he's talking about climate change and all this stuff. And, back then it was kind of like, well, does he really want to control my entire life? And as you
Yes.
go through this, yes, he does. They want to control what car you drive. They want to control what your
They want to
thermostat's
control
set at.
all production and all consumption. That's what
Yeah.
sustainable development is productive control and consumptive control. And the reason they want to push that is because they want everything to be the same across the world. So they want this one world governance. That's what ESG is, environmental social governance. It's the triple bottom line of sustainable development that comes from the United Nations. We used to call it Agenda 21. Now it's Agenda 2030. Whatever you want to call it, it's diabolical and it's satanic. But that's what this is, and that's why I say it's always all about the land, because when these people get control of production and consumption, ultimately they get control of how we produce, and that is the land. And so that's what you see with the World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy. They're all in on this. They understand that if they have control of the land, the people cannot produce as they see fit. And that's what freedom is to produce how you see fit. See, it's a very, very long, well, the long livestock's long shadow. It's a very long and convoluted web. And you have to understand that all of this, even what we're talking about with the Angus Association today, all of this is interwoven within itself.
Yeah, and the more you study it, the more you realize it. And what this ESG has just became a tool of the United Nations and livestock's long shadow. Like that was the beginning of this program and this goal. And the ESG, they came in with this tool to get everyone behind it. And that's
Correct.
when, through those years, BlackRock, which is your number one investment in Tyson. Cargill's private, but they have a lot of investments that we don't know about. And they started dealing with these animal rights and climate people during that time too. And
I
BlackRock,
remember when
Vanguard.
Cargill sold all of their feed yards so they could invest in
Yeah.
the alternative meat market.
Yeah, they did it at the exact same time, and their quote
Yep,
was, "We want to make other investments." And
that's
not much
right.
longer, they invested in these two companies. So that was 2019, and then we go to 2021, and we are in NCBA's came out with their goal of being climate neutral by 2040. They wanted the cattle industry to be climate neutral by 2040, and that just goes back to just like what I said about when you say for sustainable beef, when you say the cattle industry needs to be climate neutral, well, that must mean we're really destroying the climate right now, and
Yeah,
we have this goal where we have to stop destroying the climate. And what that is, that's a net zero goal. They call it climate neutral because they know this language, and they know some people like me and Shad know this language. Net zero is a United Nations ESG, all of that
directive.
stuff tool or term, and they just changed it to climate neutral. It means the same thing. You have a zero,
Yep.
zero. You get your score handed down to you by these ESG nuts. Um, so that you can be climate neutral. And when that came out, I could not believe it. I came out with a bunch of stuff like, this is insane. Who are you working for? It goes back to that. Like, do you think
Yes.
the American cattle producer in 2021 during COVID, after the Holcomb beef fire, the market was in shambles then, and they came out with their top priority out of their convention as being climate neutral. NCBA has absolutely no interest in working for the American cattle producer.
No,
That's what
none.
that showed me. And they're not shy about saying it. And Angus Association is affiliate. Like this keeps going back to the same stuff. But then in 2022, now we're getting into the very similar stuff of what the Angus Association is doing when the USDA came out. This is Tom Vilsack's USDA again. So this is under Joe Biden. 1 year after Joe Biden gets elected, NCBA comes out with that climate neutral goal. 2022 is the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, which I have talked a ton about. $3 billion going into the agriculture industry, mainly to these NGOs and corporations. Some of the biggest ag corporations in the world getting close to $1 million. ADM got over $90 million. And then, Farm Journal is their main beef one. They got $40 million, and who was partnered in that with them was NCBA and ABS, which is
American Breeder
yeah,
Services.
American Breeder Services. This ABS is one of the worst companies when it comes to this kind of stuff. Um, but then the next year after the climate smart commodities come out, which I talked about when that came out, the goal of that and Tom Vilsack's USDA was measure, monitor, report, verify. Everything the USDA wanted to do is to measure, monitor, report, and verify greenhouse gas emissions for agriculture. That was their goal. They had no
Right.
interest in helping farmers or ranchers do anything. They wanted to just measure greenhouse gas emissions and reduce them.
Collect your data.
Right. And that was the whole goal behind that deal. And so then a year later, USDA comes out with their EID rule. And this is another thing they talk about. I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist when I talk about how EIDs are the perfect tool to, you just said collect your data. They're the perfect tool to collect and store and force you to have this data for your animals. And that goes into right what we're talking about now. I mean, it goes into everything. When I started looking at the EID rule, I came out with a video and I read the Tyson Foods ESG report. And in that, I talk about how that's a tool. Well, the main tool to control producers is called Scope 3. And that goes in that you have to report your Scope 3 in your ESG report. And what that is they call it upstream and downstream greenhouse gas emissions, meaning your consumers' greenhouse gas emissions and your producers' greenhouse gas emissions. And so Scope 3 would record the greenhouse gas emissions of the people you're buying your goods from, which in Tyson Foods, Cargill's case, is cattle producers.
Yes.
And in Tyson Foods ESG report, Tyson Foods will also refine Scope 3 estimate and goals as supplier data and standardized methodologies for calculations across industry sectors become available. So supplier data, standardized methodologies across industry sectors. And then a year later, I think that was maybe their 2023 Scope 3. And then so that same year, USDA comes out and says, we're going to mandate these EID tags. That's exactly what an EID tag would do. And so there you're at 2023, 2024. And that whole EID thing has been shown to be such a fraud and a scam because what they first said was, we're only going to have this segment of cattle. And then they force all the veterinarians to only tag with the IDs, which
Exactly.
we've gotten into, and we'll get into more going down. But in 2024, you had someone run for election who said climate change, all of this climate change, man-made climate change stuff is a hoax and it's a scam. And I don't want to see one more windmill ever put up. And he pushed back on all this stuff, and he won election. And then all of a sudden here in 2025, we still have the cattle industry taking money from the Bezos Earth Fund, trying to calculate these greenhouse gas emissions on their cattle. I mean, that's what this Angus Association thing is, and just going along with it, just continuing this deal. There is so much money and so much push behind this. We have a president who's against it, but it doesn't mean they're going to try to slow down. They're going to push even harder and fight even harder to get this to continue to go and to get everyone under, control every industry, control every aspect of every industry. And if you really want to look back on that timeline and that seat at the table from, you go from 2006, the report comes out. What was the end goal of that report? Reduce cattle numbers throughout the world,
Yeah.
right?
Says that on the USDA APHIS website.
Yeah, the United Nations wanted to reduce, especially in America, they wanted to reduce the livestock numbers. And you look at where we are 15 years later, the smallest herd in 70 years, the smallest
Yep.
cattle herd, the smallest number of cattle producers, the most concentrated industry this has ever been. The goal is full steam ahead, becoming
Full
accomplished.
steam. Full steam.
And it is because, like I said, the cattle industry lost, didn't have balls for the last 15 years to stand up to this and say cattle are not destroying the environment. Cattle are not causing climate change. But now here we are at a point where we have a group of Angus Association members who need to be applauded and need to be supported, and everyone needs to sign this petition because this isn't just about, cattle production even. I mean, it's definitely not just about the Angus industry. This, supporting these deals is going to end up coming across the entire industry. Every breed and everybody who breeds cattle is going to have their greenhouse gas breeding score on their ear tags. There's no doubt about that.
Well, thank
That's the
God
end
for
goal.
Brian Palmer and his buddies, because I mean, whatever the catalyst was for them to wake up to this, you're right. The Angus Association was just the very. It wasn't the beginning, but it is not in a box to the Angus Association. It is going full steam ahead, as you say, and it's going to affect every trade association, every who buy into it. And so maybe these guys are going to get on top of this and say, you know what? I think we'll take our money elsewhere and we'll form an organization that uplifts liberty and freedom and production. Maybe that's what's going to happen. I don't know, but I would love to see all of these members just take their money out of these trade associations
Yeah.
and say, you know what? We're going to finally stand for independent production. We're going to be the true grassroots producers, uplifting liberty and freedom, because that's what this is about. And we're going to protect our private property rights. That's what we're going to do. Because believe it or not, these Angus cattle are property. And
Yeah.
this is an attack on private property.
Yeah, and I mean, for you who's been fighting against this for pretty much decades now, me, I'd talk about, I've been in it for almost 8 years now, and when you do this, there's times where it's kind of like looking at this ESG thing, you just want to feel like you're screaming over the hills and nobody's listening. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, there's some people listening. We've definitely grown through the years, but there's not near enough. Like the cattle industry has to wake up,
agree.
and so to support these guys who are, I'm not saying they're waking up because a lot of them have been on this same thing, as we have also, but to stop supporting these affiliates of these organizations, or to just get rid of the leadership of these guys going along with it. I looked up on their ProPublica deal. I saw their 990 form. Their CEO's making over $400,000. I mean, that's nothing compared to like the LMA when we went over, but it's
Yeah.
still, these guys are completely disconnected. And all they give a shit about is how much money they can bring in and getting a seat at the tables, and doing what they're told by the guys up above them.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because and I will give props to the Angus people. They really created a good brand and a brand that took
Yeah,
off, right?
that's
I mean, they did a good job there years and years ago.
yeah. And to show how disconnected they actually were, um, after the petition comes out, Angus Association thought, well, we'll show them, and they post a quote from Oprah.
Yes.
Here, I'll read it. Real integrity is doing the right thing, knowing that nobody's going to know whether you did it or not.
There you
Oprah
go.
Winfrey. So they quote the one lady who like if you're old enough, you know that she came out and said, well, you'd probably know better than I do. What did she say back
Well,
in the BSE scare?
yeah, they had in 1997,
8?
they had a show. The Oprah Winfrey had a show called Dangerous Foods, and her and a former rancher who turned environmentalist activist, she had him on his show, and the show was called Dangerous Foods. Well, they come out and said that beef, because of the in mad cow disease, they disparaged beef on live TV.
Didn't she say she was never going to eat another
She
hamburger?
said she never put a burger back to her mouth, right? And so Paul Engler with Cactus Feeders and a bunch of his partners sued them under a food. It's called it's a food liability law in Texas. Paul Engler and his buddies, they lost, and Oprah Winfrey comes out of the courthouse and she says, "Thank God for free speech," and it was a big, big deal. But they dang sure those cattle producers did lose, and I don't think Oprah Winfrey made a friend of cattle producers
Well, it just
at
goes to
all
show it. It kind of makes
forever.
you, does it make you feel old that now they got some whoever it is, some 20 or 30 some year old who has no idea that Oprah got sued by the cattle industry.
Yeah.
Like his great comeback to this petition was from a lady who said she's never going to put
I
another
know. I
hamburger in her
mean,
mouth.
but listen, the American Angus Association took that down. Let's,
Yeah.
I mean, they,
Because
that
I mean everybody, so it's been screenshotted. Maybe I'll put it up
exactly.
because they obviously took it down because,
Heck yeah.
people
I mean, it
know.
just shows you the disconnect
Yeah.
between who is working for these trade associations and the producers. If you go to Methane Hub or if you go to Bezos Earth Fund, these people that they have working, what they call their staff or their leadership, quote unquote leadership, every one of these people is below 35 years old. They all look effeminate. And they're soft, they're young kids. They have, you can tell by looking at them that they have zero agriculture knowledge or production experience at all. They have no skills, they have no earthly idea what it takes to live in the world in any real world scenario,
Well,
right?
then the
They're
guy,
soft.
and the other thing is they aren't American.
No,
The guy
they're
running the
not. There's a
Bezos
couple of
Earth,
Americans on there, but they don't
they're
look.
not America first.
Nope, they're
And
not
this guy
American.
running the Bezos, Andy Jarvis, who's running the whole deal, and he's kind of the push behind this. And that goes back to my timeline too. Their goal coming out of like 2010, 2015 on was we're going to destroy the cattle industry. We're going to create all these other proteins and we're going to get people to quit buying meat. They've realized that that is not going to happen. Right?
No, we got the
Beyond
greatest
Meat's in the
demand in
gutter.
history right now.
Memphis Meats has said that they're going to have product on the shelves by the end of the year. They've said that for like since they're in almost 10 years now.
Uh-huh.
And it never happens. And
Right.
so these big investors are looking at these big people pushing this ESG movement are looking at it and they're like, well, we're not going to get rid of them. So how can we go forward? And how they can
We
go
can use
forward
them.
is
We're going
what
to use them.
yeah. How can we control them? And because this Andy Jarvis, he talks about the future of food needs to be plant-based, it needs to be lab meat, but also we're probably going to have to eat some regular meat too. So he's not cutting out regular meat, but he's like, we're going to control the way it's raised and make sure that we control these greenhouse gas emissions. And he's from Colombia, or he lives in Colombia. He's from England, which goes back to this list of countries. One of the countries that goes back to the disconnect too. Angus Association. They list the countries which are the UK, Australia, Ireland. There might be another one, but
New
you're listing
Zealand.
Ireland in there when Ireland just came out with they're going to euthanize cattle
Yep.
for
New
to
Zealand taxed cattle
yeah,
$100 a
to
head.
reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, they want to
Yep.
euthanize cattle, and that's the country you want to deal with. England's just as bad almost. Um, they're nuttier than ever on this stuff, and it all comes back to United Nations control America last. I mean, these are the plans, and
Freedom
so
last, buddy.
I guess
So
the
we need
last thing to
everybody,
say,
if you feel led, need to go and sign this petition. I don't know how many signatures it's got on it, but I got a text this morning from a guy and he says, as far as the petition goes and a lot of information outflow from the great big Angus breeders, I'm not hearing anything. And I said, well, the silence is deafening, right?
yeah,
They're
right.
they're going to have to choose who they're going to serve. Are they going to serve, liberty, or are they going to serve the tyrants?
All right. So I guess to wrap it up, hats
Man, we
off.
could talk about this for weeks, buddy.
I know it. Hats off to those guys, the Angus Association
Great job, Brian
members
Palmer.
who did that, who put that out there and got probably more attention than we've gotten yelling about
Yeah,
this for a long time because we're getting into the mainstream. I mean, it's starting to be
and I'm happy for them.
eyes are open. Yeah, I couldn't
They're our
be
teammates.
right. And it takes courage when you operate in those circles and you have to sell those bulls to, they all kind of work together and for those guys to do that, it's not a little thing for them to stand up and it ain't easy, for somebody like me who doesn't who doesn't have the repercussions of like a big cattle producer. I can come on here and yell about whatever I want, but those guys that they have other things they have to worry about, and they decided, it's worth it to stand up and do the right thing in this point, and that's what we need more of. So we need as
They
much
either,
support behind those guys as we can to
yeah,
show people that this is how you do it. You stand up
they
for
either
what's
do it now or their kids pay for it. Their
right.
kids won't have a chance to fight.
Right. And also share this video. If you want to support Lonesome Lands and what we're doing more than anything, I talk about how you can go on that website and subscribe, but more than anything, share this video and
Dang
show
right.
people what we've been talking about. I mean, I've been talking about for 8 years. Shad's been doing it. Who knows?
I just
Who
say be
knows
a
how long
freedom
his old
maker.
ass has been up to it?
Yeah, just be a freedom maker, man. That's
Not a
what this is
freedom
all
taker.
about. Not a freedom taker, be a freedom maker.
Put that on Shad's tombstone.
Dang right.
What should we do next?
You want to talk about Elon Musk and his
Sure.
criticism of President Trump's big, beautiful bill?
Yeah, Elon Musk has come out. I'll read it. I'm sorry. So this is Elon Musk. I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. I don't know if he hit the desk, but
Disgusting.
I did. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. That reminds me, we go back to the election and everybody's saying Trump's a lunatic. How can you vote for this guy? And people would say, I'm not just voting for Donald Trump. I'm voting for Elon Musk. I'm voting for Tulsi Gabbard. I'm voting for, all of these cabinet members that he ended up bringing along with him who were campaigning with him and said this is what we were going to do. I voted for that, right? This is a massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. That's what I voted for. I didn't
Yeah.
vote for the big, beautiful bill that says, um, let's just keep spending money. We'll cut your taxes and then we'll spend even more money. I mean, he got it half right, but anyway.
Well, I mean, it goes to show you that what you and I have been talking about these omnibus bills is very dangerous.
Yeah.
And there, I looked at the bill. I mean, it's 1,088 pages, and there's good stuff in there, stuff I like, but it needs to stand alone. We need to do this the right way.
And
And
it goes
I
back to,
applaud Elon Musk for coming out and questioning Donald Trump. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that Donald Trump knew where he stood on it. I'm sure of it. He was in his office last week. And I guess they'll have to agree to disagree, but I really liked what Elon Musk was doing.
and for every idiot out there that wants to say, well, you voted for it. You voted for, this is what you voted for. Well, what else are we going to vote for? You know how much worse it would be if Kamala Harris was in there? Give me a break on that crap.
Agree.
Anyway, should we move on to Head Blight?
Yep, let's do it.
So last night, if you didn't see, I'll read the tweet and then Shad will explain it. FBI Director Kash Patel tweeted, new. I can confirm that the FBI arrested a Chinese national within the United States who allegedly smuggled a dangerous biological pathogen into the country. The individual, oh boy,
Yung
Yongqing
Qing Leon,
Yan,
Yung Qing Jian,
I don't know, is alleged to have smuggled a dangerous fungus called Fusarium. Dang,
Graminarium,
I shouldn't have started this knowing
Fusarium graminarium.
Graminarium, which is an agroterrorism agent into the U.S. research at the University of Michigan where she works. What are you doing, Wolverines? Um, that was that was not part of the tweet. This fungus can cause a disease called head blight, a disease of wheat, barley, maize, and rice, causing significant health issues in both humans and livestock. That's a key word for us. That's why we're talking about it. Significant health issues in both humans and livestock. It is responsible for billions of dollars in economic losses worldwide each year. Evidence also indicates that Jian had expressed loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party and had received funding from the Chinese government for similar work on this pathogen in China. Jian's boyfriend, Xiang Lu, also charged in the complaint, works at a Chinese university where he conducts research on the same pathogen. Liu is alleged to have first lied, then admitted to also smuggling Fusarium gramineum, I think I changed it there, into America through the Detroit Metropolitan Airport so that he too could conduct research the University of Michigan. I think it should be at the University of Michigan. See, I'm not the only one that screws up my tweets. Both individuals have been charged with conspiracy, smuggling goods into the United States, false statements, and visa fraud. This case is a sobering reminder that the CCP is working around the clock to deploy operatives and research to infiltrate American institutions and target our food supply, which would have grave consequences, putting American lives and our economy at serious risk. And then he goes on to FBI will continue working tirelessly to be on guard against it. Great job. Justice will be done. That's how he ends it.
Well, I think there was a love rift between I got to figure out their names.
The love.
Yongwin
Oh,
John
really?
and Zhang Yang Liu.
A scorned lover?
Like you said, they're loyal to the Communist Party, but the FBI said authorities found a scientific article on Liu's phone that was titled Plant Pathogen Warfare Under Changing Climate Conditions. And so the love rift, I think, happened. It says a week before arriving in the U.S., according to investigators, Liu, who is the guy, is that right? Yes, who is the guy boyfriend, exchanged messages with Jian, who is the girl, and he said to her, "It's a pity that I still have to work for you." So they were fighting, and the
But he
FBI
doesn't have
said
to anymore.
the FBI said that Liu replied, "Once this is done, everything will be easy." And like you said, Jew denied having any guilt in this. And then she come back and said, "Yep, I do."
Yeah,
And
she admitted to smuggling it in.
so how does that work? Is that kind of is that an open border policy? I mean, where they had their visas?
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I think
if
it's
you're a Chinese spy, you probably got everything you need to get over here and get in there. But one thing it reminds me of Keely Cavella when she talked about the cartels growing a bunch of weed on national forest land in California. Everybody thinks drug cartels Mexico, but they were Chinese.
really,
Yeah,
were they working directly with the Mexican drug cartels or separately?
I think separately. She said it's mainly like Chinese nationals growing weed in the
Wow.
forest, and they are
Well,
cartel type people, armed and dangerous.
that's a
Someone came on them and they run them out at gunpoint. A rancher. It's because ranchers have those grazing leases.
well, they also did that. The Cuban cartels did that when they opened marijuana up in Colorado, and they were buying ranches, and they actually had, sight towers out to protect around these ranch homesteads where they were growing. I mean, it happened just 10 miles west of my mom's, and so that's weird.
Yeah. Well, it's
But there's
also
a
weird
lot
all
of
this.
talk right now about the drug trade coming across all borders, apparently, and the human trafficking. There's lots and lots of talk, especially in agriculture, and there's a little bit of interwoven connection between the cartel drug trade into the meats and vegetables that's coming across the border. Not the meats now, but the vegetables that sure are. And the human trafficking, like it's all connected. Like the human trafficking, the victims of human trafficking are being forced to pull all of these fruits and vegetables across the border where they're hiding drugs and they know they can't talk about it. It's very, I've heard this on several occasions and I'm like, yikes, it's very scary.
Yeah. So to get back, head blight, did you look that up? Fusarium head blight, also known as scab, is a fungal disease that primarily affects wheat and barley, but can also impact other cereal grains and wild grasses. So it's a disease in the plants. It's a serious concern due to its potential to cause significant yield and quality losses. You hear head blight and you think it's going to hurt people. Um, but it sounds like it's significant yields and quality losses along with the production of harmful myotoxins. Oh, so it does.
Yeah, if you eat it,
create
yeah.
toxins.
What can happen is that stuff can spread, and then they put limits and boundaries on exportation across state lines. That's what they did when the wheat rust hit, or I think it was wheat rust. It was some wheat-borne disease 20 years ago. And I could not load a truck. My cattle had to be inspected. I mean, I had to dry lot them for like 3 days before I could load them on a truck. And so what happens then? Well, that becomes a food security issue if you cannot transport your grains or your animals. You couldn't go across the state lines with a combine that had been in a wheat field. They had to clean their
Hmm.
tires, and it was
Yeah.
amazing.
So it says fusarium head blight can lead to the production of mytoxins, mycotoxins, mycotoxins, such
Mycotoxins?
such as I'm not even going to try this, but it says which can contaminate the grain and be harmful to humans and livestock. So it is harmful if you eat it. It doesn't really get into how harmful, but bad deal. But very interesting for the ag community and consumers as well. Brooke Rollins update.
Yep, Brooke Rollins update. You want to go or you want me to
No,
take it?
I don't have anything.
Brooke Rollins update.
You're the stalker.
Yeah. On May 27th, 2025, Brooke Rollins come out with new efforts to fight the New World screwworm, which we know is supposedly about 700 miles south of the American border, which we know is probably about 700 miles closer than what they're talking about. She announced that USDA is going to invest $21 million to renovate a New World screwworm fly production facility in Mexico that has been there. We're going to redo it. We're going to pay for it. What that would do is that would let us partner up with Mexico to make about 44 flights per week with dumping out 100 million New World screwworm sterile flies to fight back on this New World screwworm issue that we do not want into the United States. We do have a partnership with Panama. Obviously, that partnership has some holes in it because now all of a sudden we're talking about the New World screwworm being very close to the United States. That partnership is called COPEG with the Panamanian government. There are two U.S. legislators, one out of Texas, one out of New Mexico, that have proposed a bill in Congress that would fund the building of a New World screwworm fly facility in Texas to help us fight that. And I think that's a good idea. I really like that. A little news on Secretary Rollins. It is a possibility that she is going to be speaking at the RCAF National Convention. She has not confirmed that, but that's if we can get her there to speak, it's going to be a big deal. So we need to get everybody out there. But the most important part of the RCAF convention, of course, is the Lonesome Report will be held live on the Lonesome Lands podcast at the RCAF convention, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope the host of the Lonesome Lands podcast is looking forward to that. And we're going to touch on all kinds of policy issues and topics. Harriet Hagman will be there, Alex Newman, myself, Roger McGowan, who is a constitutional lawyer that teaches constitutional law at Washburn University. He's going to be a great speaker there. Lots of good things happening. And of course, we're going to get to celebrate really our independent cattle industry with our friends and neighbors. And that's going to be fun. Oh, by the way, sounds like Governor Roden out of South Dakota is going to be there. First time ever. And the Mod family, they're the ones that
Yes.
we just assisted in. Hopefully we had some influence there, Jim, with helping get charges dropped against them on a very nefarious land issue. They're going to be a special guest at RCAF convention. So lots of good things
See
happening, buddy.
everybody there. Come see us. I'm at the point where I'm just nervous about getting everything to work. This will be recorded live. It won't be viewed live, probably. I mean, it'd be cool if we
No,
could
it's
do it
going to be
live.
viewed live.
Well, yeah, you can view it live on Cattle
Yeah,
USA, right? Yeah. But I'll have the YouTube out and it'll
it'll
be
be fun.
yeah, it'll be fun. I'm already stressed about making everything work, but I hate this. I gotta get my nerd out here. Kurt, we'll see.
Well,
Get
the
out
funny
here.
thing is Jaden and our computer techs there at the RCAF convention that we have on hand every year are phenomenal. They are great.
Well, there. I'm gonna need some phenomenal nerds. All right, Lonesome History. This was recorded yesterday, so here you go. Lonesome History brought to you by. We got a great sponsor this week. My favorite, maybe sponsor ever, Ben Schreiber. He emailed me and said I would like to sponsor a Lonesome History segment. I do not have anything to list for an ad. Just want to support your work and put a shout
That's
out from
awesome.
one small voice on the sideline.
Where
I
does Ben
appreciate you.
live?
What's that?
Where does Ben live? Windthorst, Texas?
I don't know. I just printed out this one email. I think I have it.
You need to get a more personal connection with your subscribers
That's the
because
trouble with me and everything. I'm not good at reaching out. I mean, we email back and forth, but I didn't ask where he's from. But you interrupted. I just want to
sorry about
support
that.
your work and put a shout out from one small voice on the sideline. I appreciate you and Shad mentioning faith, God, and the values of liberty and freedom of our
Hmm.
nation's founding.
Thanks, Ben. I
No
appreciate that.
kidding. What a great. So Ben
That's a great
sponsored it, and
comment.
then I also got Dale Anderson, who is from. I got a letter here from him, and he sent money in too. He didn't even ask to sponsor anything, but he's from Pennsylvania, and he liked my hat. And
You have a good
yeah, I
hat,
mean,
sir.
just people. I mean, that's how this whole thing is going to continue to grow and continue to get better.
Thank you to Dale Anderson as well.
Yeah,
That's
go to
awesome.
lonesomelands.com where you can just subscribe right there on the website or email Jim at lonesomelands if you want to sponsor anything.
I'd love to meet all these good people.
Yeah, but last week I got into this Charlie Goodnight book and I couldn't put it down.
Okay.
Last week we talked about the children's grass and the whole lease fight episode. And so this time I just wanted to focus mainly on Charles Goodnight and the end of his life. Just to describe him in the best chapter of this book, which the book is Goodnight, Charles Goodnight, Cowman and Plainsman by J. Evetts Haley. And Haley knew him for 10 years and followed him around and got all his stories. And then he wrote this book. And he says Goodnight relentlessly drove himself at his work until the end. When he was 91, I saw him swear at the sight of men lounging on the north side of a building. I'll be damned if I ever could find a time to lie in the shade. Um, and since he was busy, he was difficult to interview. A high pressure reporter from Kansas City paper made the long journey to the ranch and found him sweating over a pair of post hole diggers. The dirt a flying. He rushed up to the colonel, thrust out a glad hand, and breezily announced, Colonel Goodnight, Brown is my name. Straightening from the task, the colonel drilled him with his eye and roared, What in the hell can I do about it? I didn't name you. That's how he welcomed reporters. Others suffered a similar reception when L.F. Sheffley, the retiring secretary of the Panhandle Plains Historical Society, first called upon him. The colonel was fixing a gate to one of the corrals. Upon announcing his name, Sheffy was greeted no less vigorously. I don't give a damn what your name is. What in the hell do you want? But he and the historian became good friends.
That's funny.
You should try that out next time somebody asks.
Well, it kind
Sometime,
of reminds you of that very last scene in Lonesome Dove, right?
yeah,
Where that guy comes up to him, that reporter
I'm
comes up
sure
to
that's
him.
what it's based on.
I I'd say so.
Yeah, because and McMurtry talks about in that bonus edition on that DVD, he talks about it, people say it was based on that, and he goes, "Oh, it's not." There was a story that that's loosely based on Goodnight, bringing Oliver Loving back, but and I always thought Goodnight was like such a complicated guy. Neither of those characters fit into like he almost kind of encompassed both Gus and Woodrow, I thought. But yeah, the whole no BS kind of attitude that Woodrow
Yeah,
has was
definitely.
definitely based on Charles Goodnight kind of demeanor.
Yeah.
Um, and he had no patience with shoddy work and loose methods. I guess that's the next part of this. But the line I always think of, you want to think something, why don't you think the roof back up on that barn? Where Woodrow says that. Um, at the JAs, he kept a mesquite grub patch where he tested the word of wandering cowpunchers when they said they wanted to work. If they spent the required number of days grubbing mesquite roots, a most menial task for a cowboy, he put them on horses and sent them to the outfit. So there's something for you Texans that won't get off your horse and go to work.
Yep. And
Goodnight
there's
wouldn't
a
have
bunch
hired you if
of
you
them.
wouldn't go dig up a mesquite root.
Yeah, that
Um,
reminds me of the time I was shipping lots of cattle out of here. I mean, a bunch, and they were all going to Colorado and at that time Nebraska and South Dakota. And so I was had a lot of things to think about. So I hired some help, and of course we have to process every one of them. We put a fly tag in them and we reworm them before they go north. And I had this guy, and they were charging me lots of money per day. And he goes, "Hey, just so you know, I don't get off my horse." And I said, "Well, I don't guess we can use you here because there's a
yeah,
lot of shoot work here. You can ride your horse to bring the cattle up, but you're going to have to get off and do some shoot work." And he wouldn't. He left. He didn't come back. I said, "There's no need." It's kind of like having a house cleaner that won't wash windows. It doesn't make sense.
yeah, yeah. I think you could. I think Charlie would have said there's no need to get on if you're not going to get off.
And I think that's a good saying too.
Yeah, it said he loved to engineer a difficult task, to mortise the corners of a log house, to shoe a mule, and to work in the shop at the anvil. I wasn't gonna say this, but since you gave that story, it said he had no grub patch at Goodnight, Texas, but when a boy came by and applied for work, he gave him a shovel and a grubbing hoe and showed him a wild gourd vine of healthy proportion and told him to dig it up, being careful to get every particle of its roots. Thinking that the job would soon send the boy on his way, he went about his own affairs until late in the day. He happened to pass that way again, and the youngster had half the yard dug up. "You're just the boy I've been looking for," he said, and
Yeah.
kept him on for years.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
There's a lot of Texans that need to. They aren't going to work if they have to get off their horse. I
They
think
must have had good rains back then if their gourd vine was that that big.
yeah. Well, who knows? Um, But then, this last chapter kind of it goes through his whole life and just kind of describes how he was and it describes the end of his life too. But he says at his wife's this was after his first wife died. He married, I think, his second cousin, that was way
No,
younger than him. Was it?
way younger. They were not related. Her
Yes, they
last name,
were.
no, they weren't. Her last name was Goodnight, and
Right.
she had read about him for in Mon. She was
Yeah,
her
I
and her
know.
brother was raised in Montana, and she had read about him in the newspapers, and so I think she heard his wife had died and he was ailing, and she came down to. Was she a reporter? Maybe she was a reporter. Somebody's gonna have to confirm that. And she came down to interview him, and she fell in love with the guy. I think probably more fell in love with the story of the man, and they ended up marrying. And he was, yeah, she was like what, 50 or 60 years younger than him.
Okay, at the age of 91, he married Corinne Goodnight, an earnest young woman who called to see him because of his name, found him sick, and nursed him back to health. So that's all it says is an earnest
Well,
young woman
according,
who called to see him because of his name because they had the same last name.
well, I just AI'd it, and it says yes, Charles Goodnight and Corinne Goodnight were related. They were distant cousins. Corinne Goodnight's maiden name was also Goodnight. She was a nurse and telegraph operator who nursed Charles back to health after his wife's death. They married in 1927 when he was 91 and she was 26.
They talk
Wow.
about Bill Belichick, the football coach, and he's got a 20-some girlfriend. I don't think he's 91. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't think he was worth much there at the end as far as like he wasn't like a big rich guy.
No, I'm pretty sure he was not.
Yeah, he was kind of I don't know, but
But what a life story.
yeah, so after he got married, at his wife's solicitation, he joined the church shortly before his death. But when someone asked him what church it was, he answered characteristically, I don't know, but it's a damn good one. Um, it said throughout the West, no one could excel him in downright cussing. He could cuss in more varied ways, more eloquently, and more beautifully than any man I've ever heard. In talking about acquaintance, he once said most seriously that he was a mighty good man, but with one serious fault. He cursed too damn much.
It cares too damn much. That's a
Uh,
good title for this episode of Lonesome Lands.
um, before women preachers and before women preachers and all his vigorous language ripped up from the very soil of the earth, and yet, so far as I know, never gave offense to anyone, simply because it was not profanity after all, but a vernacular, full of the saltiness of the time. That goes to J. Evans Haley's writing, and he ends it pretty good too. The writer here. He said, my story is done. For 10 years I've lived with a great ample nature. But as I think of his untended grave on the staked plains of Texas, with the buffalo grass gently encroaching
Mm.
thereon, I can hardly believe that his own country understood the depths of his nature, the sturdiness of his character, or the caliber of the man. Yet his tradition rides high on the dust of the trail, and my tribute at last is his own. I wish I could find words to express the trueness, the bravery, the hardihood, the sense of honor, the loyalty to their trust and to each other of the old trail hands, he once wrote of his Texas cowboys. They kept their place around a herd under all circumstances, and if they had to fight, they were always ready. Timid men were not among them. The life did not fit them. I wish I could convey in language the feeling of companionship we had for one another. Despite all that has been said of him, the old-time cowboy is the most misunderstood man on earth. May the flowers prosper on his grave and ever bloom for I can only salute him in silence.
Amen.
That's
That's
Charlie
awesome.
Goodnight's end of the book. But all right, there we are. I mean, we want to talk about courage and we want to talk about standing up for things, and we got a group of guys that did it this week. So hats off to them.
Hats off to them, and I hope that their movement stands the test of time and honors our legacy because
Yeah.
what they did was a big deal, and I'm sure proud of them. So great job, Brian Palmer and company.
Yep. Hopefully it's the start of something.